In Central California, there lies a city perpetually infested by crime, poverty, and meth. It is California's festering grundle, saddled between the thighs of a filthy Dollar Tree and a shuttered vape shop. It is a place where dreams are born dead, where the unending hum of swamp coolers, scent of diesel, and strangling tumbleweeds the size of beach balls suffocate its residents from cradle to grave. This city and its cruel flavor of purgatory is known as Fresno. Those born there have a dream of getting out. Those who die there do so with the regret of having never broken free of the chains that bind them. But when your daily burdens consist of air pollution that fails to achieve United Nations standards for first world countries, addicts busting into your car to steal something as simple as a jacket, and legions of tweakers demonstrating the fentanyl, breaking out of Fresno is no small hurdle. Rising to the challenge is one who calls himself MetalExpensive 4530. His mission was straightforward: to earn enough money to escape Fresno and join civilized society. Good people, let us observe and learn from this brave soul's grind, his drive, and ultimately, his fall back into the abyss that is Fresno, California. MetalExpensive 4530 is a young man of humble origins, born to a truck driver who makes his living shipping agricultural produce throughout California's heartland. As a speaker of Hindi, it is likely that Mr. Metal is of Khajiit descent, although it is unclear if he ever lived in India himself. From a young age, Metalbro was committed to the hustle, even foregoing expensive higher education in exchange for an early jump on employment as a truck driver, following his father's footsteps. But unlike long-haul truckers who can earn well into the six figures, regional agricultural trucking pays a much more modest salary, often around $25 an hour. Although this is adequate for a young person, it is not sustainable for those who seek to break out from the left side of the income distribution curve. Nevertheless, Senor Metal, while still living with his parents, was able to save up a respectable sum of approximately $30,000 relatively quickly after finishing high school in 2020. He invested this money aggressively into a litany of out-of-the-money calls, seeking a massive early lead in building wealth. After all, there's not much to do in Fresno, and therefore nothing to spend his money on anyway. Initially, this strategy was fruitful, but when the COVID bubble popped in 2021, the metallic homie suffered extreme losses, liquidating his holdings and relieving him of the burden of managing his portfolio further. Over a year of regional truck driving was pissed away. He bailed with about $10,000 liquid, which he left in uninspiring share positions for several years as he wallowed on, Fresno sinking its teeth further into him. But he would not go down so easily. An hombre of seemingly respectable IQ who happened to be a victim of circumstance, our man devised a plan to recover his bankroll with haste. He would assume a side hustle as a gig economy delivery driver. Reflecting on his costs, our Khajiit friend applied his truck driving experience and determined that using a gasoline-powered car to run deliveries for Amazon would be a surefire way to give back most of your gains in maintenance costs. He therefore elected to use most of the rest of his bankroll to buy a used Tesla in order to achieve an ROI faster. Despite this solid plan, Lil Metal was continuously irritated by meager pay and exhausting routes. Allegedly, his total pay before expenses was no better than California's minimum wage. In fact, Amazon did indeed need to subsidize his commissions in order to ensure his wage was not below California's legal minimum. Frustrated, he briefly swapped to driving for Instacart, but the results were no better. People apparently made very small orders to be delivered from city strip malls to bumfuck Methistan with insultingly low tips. After a final changeover to DoorDash, the results were even worse, forcing Mr. Metal to rage quit. By mid-2025, it was time to throw in the towel. Driving food and drunk people in circles around Fresno, even for such a long duration, was simply not moving the needle on his finances. If he was going to turn moon sugar into skooma, he'd need to flip his game. On October 3rd, 2025, 2 days into the government shutdown, Metalbro performed a market analysis and determined that the top was in. At the time, SPY was trading at a new high of $669, but the US market was battling an undercurrent of government industries slowly bleeding the remainder of their budget, and tech layoffs were starting to bite into the fragile economy. With things poised to worsen, the time was at hand for our metal homie to get contrarian. There was just one problem. Metalbro was somehow broke as shit. Despite having a red-hot market thesis that would bring his bankroll to new heights, our man simply did not have the cash to put a trade on the table. So he did what Khajiit are wont to do. He asked his dad for money. The situation was awkward. Asking your parents for money is never comfortable. But the young Mr. Metal had one advantage in the negotiation. He was still living at home, as his 2021 losses made moving out untenable, and I have to believe that he suffered further undisclosed losses in the interim. Metalbro's parents, unable to be naked in their own house on account of their live-in son, indeed wanted to change his housing arrangements. If loaning their son some cash was a necessary step to achieve this, it was a worthwhile investment. Big Papa Metal coughed up a ridiculous 31 grand for their son to invest. This, in my view, is a bit of a gap in MetalExpensive's explanation. There is no way your dad just hands you very specifically $31,000 in order to invest. Aside from 31K being a weird number, no one would cough up the loot like that unless your kid had a proposal more comprehensive than the market top is in. Especially since Daddy Metal is a regional truck driver himself and isn't rolling in cheddar like a Maharaja. Although our man shares no such details in his posts, I have to assume that he misspoke his intention to his father, who must have been led to believe that his son planned on using the money for a much more complete business plan. This, however, is left to speculation. Nonetheless, our homie indeed dropped a $31,000 stack into Robinhood. The wheels were already in motion. I can already tell you where Metalbro's dad messed up early on. He didn't do the classic Indian move of buying real estate and renting it out to Americans. Instead, he is the one Indian guy who decided to drive a truck instead of buying up houses to rent back to Americans at elevated prices. Perhaps he did not have adequate liquidity to make this classic move, and therefore was boxed out. And if being a landlord is something that's on your list of goals too, but you don't have enough cash to become a landlord yourself, boy do I have a solution for you. Allow me to introduce the sponsor of this video, ARC7, through whom I am also a landlord myself. At ARC7, you can buy publicly offered shares of LLCs that exist specifically to own and rent a single property. As a partial owner of rental property, a slice of the organization's profit is deposited into your account at the beginning of each month. In my own ARC7 portfolio, I own a piece of a townhouse in Virginia, a flat in Chicago, a multi-unit in California, and single-family homes in Dallas-Fort Worth. Each month, a distribution of rent money hits my account. With as little as $20, you too can own a slice of real estate, and new users who invest $1,000 will receive a $50 bonus, a 5% boost. Existing users can receive all kinds of bonuses for repeated investments too, including a dividend day bonus near the start of each month. I diligently deposit $800 each dividend day and take my $80 bonus for a 10% boost right off the bat. Join the party with my link in the description to get the maximum reward, and we'll speedrun the landlord game together, unlike Metalbro's dad. And now, let's get back to it. With $31,000 of loans from his father locked and loaded into Robinhood, the time was nigh. On October 13th, our man pulled the trigger. The wider market had taken a small breather from all-time highs, and precious metals were rallying as investors and crypto bros fled from fake digital gold to actual gold. With our man predicting more economic pain coming down the pipeline, going long gold and silver was an obvious choice. With almost his entire pot of borrowed money, the appropriately named MetalExpensive dove in balls first, putting it all on the line with a cocktail of deep out-of-the-money bullish options on gold, silver, and gold miners expiring within the next month. The plan was straightforward. Print racks like Zimbabwe as investors bailed on speculative bets to scoop up gold and silver instead. When the time was right, cash out, repay daddy, and moonwalk the rest of the gains to the bank. Simple. When the metals market dipped on October 17th, the big brave homie fully deployed the remainder of his cash balance into even more gold and silver, fully committing with no prospect of turning back. And his audacity bore fruit as precious metals recovered just as quickly. Over the next few days, things went from bad to worse as a slew of tweets from President Cheeto Bandito about the state of US-China relations rattled even the most bullish. Although SPY barely moved, the VIX Volatility Index breached 20 for the first time in months, indicating the most aggressive investors were starting to piss themselves. In response to this elevated volatility, investors continued buying gold and silver fervently, just as our man predicted. By October 20th, gold was cruising in at all-time highs, and silver had finally reclaimed a new high after 14 years. In just a couple days, Metalbro was up 50%, and his portfolio sat at $44,000. His gold call debit spreads were already at max gain, and his more aggressive silver calls were quickly approaching their strikes. Although this gain was satisfying and he considered cashing out, he was not blind to how much he'd missed out on by holding call debit spreads instead of just long calls. My back-of-the-napkin math estimates his $30,600 investment would have netted him about $35,000 in gains if he had held calls instead of call debit spreads. He couldn't leave all that on the table, for glory was at hand. He held his positions firm, as his call debit spreads would surely expire at max gain, and silver prices violently tapped his strikes. With expiration just 2 days later on October 22nd, he'd be prepared to take max gains on his spreads and reinvest into more bullish positions until such time came when he could repay his father and ride out into the sunset. Finally, Metalbro would be able to leave the trash heap known as Fresno. This place, the lowest caste of California's middleweight urban hubs, is essentially the Shudra of Californian cities, where 20% of residents live in abject poverty. To be free of Fresno's pervasive crime, excessive air pollution, and churlish fentanyl enjoyers would be a dream come true for an enterprising Khajiit like himself. All it would take is the courage to do what needed to be done. Hold strong with diamond hands. But Jai Kubera, it would not be so. On October 21st, it was Kali Yuga for gold and silver. That morning, a perfect storm of catalysts struck with the force of 1,000 suns. The US Central Bank indicated intent to slow its accumulation of gold and strengthen the dollar. Algorithmic traders liquidated positions. And worst of all, Mango popped off on Twitter. Gold completely shat itself in a reverse King Midas state of affairs. In its worst day since 2013, gold lost 5%, while silver lost 7%. In the world of precious metals, this is an apocalypse. The gold debit spreads that looked like a sure thing just a day prior were unredeemably cooked, down 90% at market open, all the way down from max gain. They were now wallowing in the mud with the Dalits. But in total, his non-FD positions clinged to some extrinsic value, leaving him with losses of only about 80% from his high. If he cashed out now, he'd only be short $20,000 on his loan from his dad. In a near catatonic state, MetalExpensive retreated to WallStreetBets and Goldbug message boards to have a rational conversation regarding the circumstances. Invariably, his fellow Redditors agreed that this dip was healthy, perhaps even expected. In no time at all, gold and silver would surely burn higher, very soon. And Metalbro needed soon to happen immediately, as expiration was tomorrow and his spreads were now 3% out of the money. But one good bounce, and he'd be back in business. That night, he prayed to Ganesha and anyone else who would listen, but the only ones who heard him were Kali and Alakshmi, Hindu gods of destruction and poverty, and their wrath left nothing behind. On the morning of October 22nd, the remaining $10,000 in Metalbro's portfolio was left a smoldering ruin. The call debit spreads were down 99.8% with no bid. His silver calls were likewise bonered, forcing him to liquidate at $9 per contract, from a buy at $493 each, a vomit-inducing 98.2% loss. His gold and silver miners fared no better. 88% of his portfolio had evaporated just minutes after market open. Only $1,050 was left. His debt to his father now exceeded his net worth by $30,000, and his all-time returns reached negative 98.8%, half of which was borrowed money. His years of driving for Uber, Amazon, DoorDash, Instacart, and unspecified California farmers were all wasted in one horrible trade, and his debt to his father would chain him to the family home. Indeed, Metalbro's dad might have made the worst investment out of everyone. All the poor man wanted to do was be free and naked in his own house. Instead, Papa Metal made a donation to the Gold and Silver Bears. His son now has no prospect of departure. The sun does not rise in Fresno. It hovers, glaring down like an auditor who already knows the numbers don't add up. The lucky ones can eventually rent a stucco apartment that smells faintly of mildew and failure, watching freight trains crawl by like dying beasts, deluding themselves into believing that it's all just temporary. But it's never temporary in Fresno. It's where ambition goes to tan, peel, and fade until all that's left is a man and his losses, squinting west toward the Gold Coast he'll never afford. Metal Homie fears this future for himself and expressed intent to try a new craft, working at an Amazon warehouse. Fortunately, he also appears interested in my advice to sell blood plasma and join the Freeloader Challenge adventure. Perhaps this can be a new start for our struggling brochacho. Good people, let this be a story of warning to both avoid clinging to that last 5% of gains when a trade goes your way. When you're at 95% gain on a spread, don't be afraid to win. You have won your trade. Accept the W and close. And just as importantly, don't borrow money to buy FDs. Instead, commit to the hustle more methodically and take your time so you can YOLO your own money instead of your dad's. And those who need to print stacks on the side, you'll want to tap into the Freeloader Challenge, just like Metalbro intends to do as well. Follow the footsteps that others have taken, and you will print bands. In the Freeloader Challenge playlist and our free Theta Gang Discord, you'll see how it's done. Thank you all for watching. Let us pray for Metalbro's dad, and I'll see you next time.